cross-border financial activity. Canada's economy is expected to benefit in the short term from somewhat more buoyant growth in the U.S. and the appreciation of the U.S. dollar. Real growth is forecasted at 1.9% in 2017 and 2% in 2018, still relatively modest by historical norms. The Chinese economy is also poised to perform somewhat modestly, more modest than in previous years, although growth of 6.6% and 6.2% is still projected for 2017 and 2018, respectively. Positive factors in this outlook include an expected ongoing policy support through stronger credit growth, as well as public investments targeted to achieve the government's growth objectives. The IMF projects a weaker than anticipated recovery in Latin America and Caribbean region, with forecasted growth of 1.1% in 2017 and 2% in 2018. Of note, these growth rates are marked down by 0.5% and 0.2% respectively from only 6 months ago. In this regard, the fund notes that domestic fundamentals in some large countries in the region continue to play an important role in constraining growth. As well, the outlook for Mexico, one of the largest economies in the region, has weakened by over 0.5% in both 2017 and 2018. According to the fund, this is linked to subdued prospects for investment and consumption due to increased uncertainty about U.S.-Mexico trade relations. I now turn to the recent domestic economic developments and prospects for the future. In this context, I will note that the Department of Statistics has delayed the publication of data in respect to the gross domestic product and its components until June of this year, as the department is finalizing a major revision and update exercise of the national accounts. As I mentioned earlier, our domestic economy has not performed to the levels required of a nation such as ours, with a relatively healthy growth of both the population and labor force. In fact, the level of total output in our economy has either remained stagnant or has declined every year since 2012. In 2015, real GDP shrank by 1.7%, and last year it is estimated to have been virtually unchanged from the prior year. Some degree of momentum in economic activity last year was evidenced in the construction-related output that was supported by a number of foreign investment projects in both New Providence and the Family Islands. While the domestic construction sector remained soft, it did receive a temporary boost in the wake of Hurricane Matthew, with the rebuilding of residential and commercial properties and repairs to public infrastructure. Otherwise, the softness of the construction sector as a whole was reflected in total mortgage disbursements for new construction repairs, which declined by almost 7%, following a gain of 24% in 2015. As for the two main components of the sector, the residential element contracted by 3% last year, while the commercial segment decreased sharply by 51%, and this on the heels of a 35% downturn in 2015. All is not well in the construction industry. Activity in the important tourism industry improved only modestly in 2016. While overall arrivals increased by 2.5% to 6.3 million, the significantly higher valued stopover segment of the market barely improved, with air arrivals up by only 0.1% to 1.4 million. Of course, the latter is the segment that is of particular significance for economic activity and employment in our country. However, the data unfortunately shows that the level of stayover visitors has essentially remained stagnant over the past 20 years at or around the levels recorded last year. Such lackluster performance is quite simply unacceptable and pales in comparison to the significant gains recorded in other major tourist destinations in the region. Our Minister of Tourism has his work cut out. Conditions in the labor market did improve modestly last year, although this reflects the temporary hiring related to the hosting of several international events, as well as the one-off hiring for reconstruction in the wake of the hurricanes. Despite these near-term developments, the national rate of unemployment remains at an unacceptably high level of 11.6% in November 2016. That is still a far cry from the unemployment rate of 6.9% that was recorded in 2001 during the favorable days of a previous F&M administration. Within the nation, the jobless rate stood at 12.9% in New Providence, while in the second and third largest market of Grand Bahama and Abaco, unemployment represents 13.9% and 9.1% of the labor force. More troubling still, from both an economic and social perspective, is the fact that our economy has not been able to generate sufficient new job opportunities for the youth of our nation. As I stressed earlier, our government will address the scourge of youth unemployment in collaboration with stakeholders through specialized programs focused on building essential job-related skills to enhance employability. Consumer price inflation last year remained muted, actually falling by 0.35%, largely due to lower international oil prices, alongside the expected tapering of the pass-through effects of the value-added tax following its implementation. This outcome compares favorably to the 1.9% rise in prices recorded in 2015. As a result of world oil price developments, domestic fuel costs fell in 2016, with the average price of diesel and gasoline declining by 10.5% and 10% respectively. This also translates into a reduction in the average fuel charge of Bahamas Power and Light by over 50% to 9.8 cents per kilowatt hour in September. However, during the first quarter of this year, domestic fuel costs rebounded, with both gasoline and diesel prices up by roughly 15 cents due to efforts by major world producers to restrain supply. As for the balance of payments, the current account deficit declined slightly in 2016 to a level of $1.1 billion, benefiting from reinsurance inflows in finance post-hurricane reconstruction. The merchandise trade deficit shrank by almost 12% to $2.3 billion, largely due to a fall in both non-oil and net fuel imports. The supply on the capital and financial account narrowed from $350 million in 2015 to $33 million last year. Influential in this development was the repayment of net short-term liabilities by the commercial banks to the tune of $306 million. Net public sector loan inflows more than doubled to $211 million, partly due to the receipt of proceeds of the government's $100 million loan. External reserves rose by $92 million during 2016 to a level of $904 million. At the end of December, they represented 16.8 weeks of total merchandise imports, up from 13.3 weeks in 2015. As for other monetary developments, bank credit quality improved slightly last year due to the sale by one institution of several tranches of its non-performing portfolio. As well, the commercial banks continued their ongoing loan restructuring activities. Based on these developments, total private sector loan arrears fell sharply by 17% to $1 billion, and the ratio of arrears to total loans was lowered by over 3 percentage points to 17.1%. These trends continue through the first quarter of 2017, as total private sector arrears fell by a further 2.6%. The near-term outlook for domestic economic activity appears modestly positive in 2017, with the phased opening of the Bahamas resort and the ongoing support provided by other foreign investment-led projects. Projected developments in the U.S., as I mentioned earlier, will also provide modest stimulus to economic activity in the short term. In the latest World Outlook, the IMF projects the Bahamian economy to expand by 1.4% this year, followed by 2.2% in 2018. However, such growth in the near term reflects developments in the tourism sector, with the opening of Bahamas providing a boost over a couple of years. Going forward, real growth of the economy is expected to be restrained by the ongoing influence of structural impediments, such as the ease of doing business and skills mismatches, with the rate of growth receding to around 1.3% per year at the start of the next decade. It is precisely these types of unacceptable and inadequate economic growth trends that are of critical concern to our government. We are thus firmly committed to delivering on the commitments that are set out in our 2017 manifesto and pursuing our stated policy initiatives to address the important and structural impediments to stronger growth and job creation. We can do better than the growth rate projected by the IMF, and we must do better, and we will do better. I now turn to fiscal performance in the 2016-17 fiscal year. I would stress at this juncture, with only very recently coming to office, that it is not for me to attempt to justify the actions of our predecessors, nor the fiscal impacts of those actions. However, for the sake of transparency and understanding on the part of the Bahamian public, I do want to describe the facts of the fiscal situation objectively and as they present themselves. To foreshadow what I'm about to discuss, let me be quite blunt. The fiscal situation in the current fiscal year is far, far bleaker than we could ever have imagined. Our predecessors have literally left us with the cupboard totally bare. The stark facts are as follows. The deficit outturn in the current fiscal year features a significant deterioration as compared to the fiscal projections contained in the previous administration's final budget. While they had forecasted a GFS deficit of 100 million, the actual outturn is now expected to be in the order of 500 million.
Better repeat that. You better repeat that.
Yeah, let me repeat that.
Yeah.
While the side opposite, while in government, in their last budget, had projected a GFS deficit of 100 million, the actual outturn is now expected to be in the order of $500 million.
That's the facts you're talking about now.
And we're going to have to deal with that number in a minute. That is an astonishing 5 times the budget forecast of only 12 months ago. The sharp deterioration in the state of the public finances in 2016-17 did admittedly flow to some extent from the multifaceted impacts of Hurricane Matthew in early October 2016.
Madam Leader.
On one hand, the hurricane severely dampened economic activity in October, with the impact extended and through to the fourth quarter of the year. As a result, it is estimated that real GDP in 2016 posted a 0 rate of growth for the year as a whole, as compared to the budgeted rate of 0.5%. This directly weakened revenue collections. Recurrent revenues were also reduced through the effects of the exigency orders implemented by our predecessors as a means of providing relief to those impacted by the hurricane. In combination, these factors resulted in a shortfall in recurrent revenue collections to the tune of $216 million, to a level of $1,960 million versus the $2.176 million budgeted. Weaker revenues thus accounted for a significant portion of the $400 million slippage in the GFS deficit in the current fiscal year. Hurricane Matthew also affected the expenditure side of the budget through the actions implemented by the government to assist in the rebuilding efforts and the repair of public infrastructure. For example, the capital expenditure of the Ministry of Works was bolstered by over $55 million above and beyond its budget allocation. Total capital expenditure thus amounted to $310 million versus the $242 million budgeted. In addition, recurrent expenditures during the year amounted to some $137 million more than had been forecasted, from $2,458 million versus $2,321 million. Key contributors to this increase was a higher level of debt redemption at $21 million, as well as higher interest payments on government debt at $27 million. Total government direct debt at the end of 2016-17 fiscal year is estimated to amount to $6.5 billion, or 71.5% of GDP. However, this is not the end of the story in the current fiscal year. It is also important to note that the combination of revenue shortfalls and accelerated spending has contributed to a greater than usual backlog of payments and commitments as we approach the end of the fiscal year. The latest information has this backlog in excess of $320 million, and it is possible that this number could increase before the end of the year as we get a greater understanding of the many deals of the former administration. And I want to pause there because as we talk this number, I want the Bahamian people to know that we don't have the final number yet, that every day we're discovering new commitments and new bills. This high level of outstanding payables is directly responsible for the government seeking emergency funding to meet the obligations of the 2016-17 budget, as vendors are clamoring for payments.
Right now.
It is our intention to fully pay all of this backlog of payments and commitments this fiscal year and minimize to the greatest extent possible any carryovers into 2017-18 fiscal year. I would also stress that this funding does not indicate insolvency, but rather gross imprudence in the management of the It is so hypocritical of the previous administration to have come to this place in 2012 and said to the Bahamian people that they would never, that they would in fact implement policy so that in the weeks before a general election,
Never happen again.
that no contract, no employment would be entered into just before an election. And Mr. Speaker, before this budget is over, we're going to come to this Parliament and let the Bahamian people know that in the months and weeks before election, days before election, the things that this previous administration has done, that has, in some respects, constrained our ability to carry forward our agenda this year. Mr. Speaker, before I turn to a review of the fiscal outlook for the 2017-18 fiscal year and beyond, it is appropriate that I first begin with a discussion of the various revenue measures that are being announced in this budget communication, as these will have an impact on the government's projection for recurrent revenues going forward. Significantly, I am today announcing a number of revenue measures that are designed to provide prompt effect to some of our government's commitments to Bahamians, provide further tax relief to consumers and businesses through customs and excise duty rate reductions, and enhanced administration and compliance in respect of major taxes. The details of these various measures are set out in an annex to the budget document. Nonetheless, to say that the extent of tax relief that we are responsibly able to announce at this time is severely constrained by the very grave financial position that we have inherited from the previous administration. The implementation of the other tax relief commitments in our manifesto must therefore be deferred until we have succeeded in putting in place the measures that will result in a more sustainable fiscal structure that leads to the elimination of deficit financing and a lower burden of debt. As for the measures that respond immediately to our commitments to citizens and businesses, we are reducing the rate of business license tax from 1.5% to 1.25% of turnover, and for hotels with turnover exceeding $400 million, from 1.25% to 1% of turnover, the latter to follow through on a commitment of the previous administration to Brookfield, the owners of Atlantis. This arrangement also calls for further reduction in their business license fees in the next year and reduction in the duty on salmon and shrimp.
What with corned beef?
What happened to the corn?
Nothing on corned beef.
Tuna.
What happened to my favorite?
We are extending the City of Nassau Revitalization Act for a further year to June 30th, 2018. We are extending the Family Island Development Encouragement Act for a further year to June 30th, 2018. And to facilitate access to medical supplies and equipment, we are eliminating customs duties on products such as X-ray machines and parts, breathing apparatus and masks, ophthalmologic that's close enough, instruments, eye instruments, yeah, and appliances, blood grouping reagents, nutritional preparations for tube feeding, dental cements and fillings, and bone reconstruction cements, medical gel, sterile tissue adhesives, and parts for carriage for disabled persons. Within the measures that we are implementing to provide further tax relief to individuals and businesses, we are eliminating or reducing import duties on a number of food and beverage products, including milk, yogurt and ice cream, bread, cakes, pastries and chips, salmon fillets, shrimp and prawns, pastas and pizza sauce, fruit drinks, canned or preserved vegetables, jams, fruit jellies and marmalades, and fruit or nut purees, mixtures of fruits and nuts, and soy sauce.
That's for the Chinese.
We are eliminating or reducing import duties on a number of personal care and other personal products, as well as household items, including shampoo, hair products, soaps, toilet tissues, low-flow shower heads, sunglasses, exercise and gym equipment, clothes hangers, shoe parts, water heater parts, sound and video equipment parts, microphone, massage apparatus, fans and air purifiers, toys, primary cell batteries, lead acid accumulator batteries, rodenticides and insecticides, and tire and inner tubes and paint.
No, not on
We're trying to lessen the burden.
We are eliminating or reducing import duties on a number of building materials, including sheets of veneers, wood flooring of various materials, wooden forms for concrete pouring, wooden posts and beams, asphalt shingles, Duroc and cement panel boards, and other cement panels and sheets. We are reducing the excise duties on electric motorcycles from 65% to 25%. And you can well imagine that is to incentivize our citizens to take advantage of more economically advantageous modes of transportation and environmentally friendly. We are providing duty exemptions on equipment and machinery specifically designed for ground repair, maintenance, and service of cruise ships and sea vessels that conduct domestic and international travel. We are providing duty exemptions on imported original artwork, once approved under the conditions outlined by the National Art Gallery. Once approved under the conditions outlined by the National Art Gallery. We are introducing measures that seek to enhance tax administration and compliance, thereby securing government revenues. Specifically, we are amending the Customs Management Act to add definitions in the interpretation sections of the Act to better accommodate a paperless customs process. As for the fiscal outlook going forward, I want to signal that the expenditure figures that are presented in the expenditure tables here today represent the outcome of ongoing work at the Ministry of Finance in collaboration with the various ministries and departments. It should go without saying that since our government has only very recently come to office, we simply have not had the time required to perform in-depth and thorough review and assessments of both recurrent and capital expenditures, nor of the efficiency and effectiveness of our revenue system. And I will return to those issues shortly. With that in mind, I now turn to a discussion of the projected fiscal situation in the 2017-18 fiscal year. Recurrent expenditures next year is posted at a level of $2,676 million, which represents an increase of $218 million over the $2,458 million outturn for 2016-17. A significantly higher level of debt redemption of $125 million from $308 million to $433 million accounts for the lion's share of that spending increase and is primarily explained by refinancing activities. Of the remaining rise in recurrent expenditure of $93 million, the following increases are noteworthy. $40 million to the Ministry of Health for the National Health Insurance Authority. Within the Ministry of Public Service and National Insurance, $35 million for medical insurance premiums, $16 million for pensions, $6 million for gratuities, and $10.6 million for office rents. You would perceive that most of that spending is coming over from 2016-17 commitments, unfunded commitments. For the Royal Bahamas Police Force, $5.6 million to cover the balance of overtime payments, and overall, the budget includes a $27 million increase for persons engaged during the 2016-17 fiscal year, $8 million for increments, and $7.5 million to accommodate payments as per industrial agreements with various public sector unions. As these other increases total some $155 million, it may be seen that in reality, we have held the line on expenditure and are accommodating only the highest priority obligations. Capital expenditure in 2017-18 is projected at $230 million, down from the hurricane-impacted levels of $310 million in 2016-17, to represent 2.5% of GDP, which is fully in line with historical trends. For its part, recurrent revenue for 2017-18 is projected to return post-hurricane to the trend to GDP that has been targeted through the previous administration's program of revenue reform, including VAT implementation. Accordingly, with the somewhat more buoyant growth in the economy that is projected for both 2017 and 18, and including the fiscal impact of the revenue measures in this budget, recurrent revenue is forecasted at $2,150 million in the coming fiscal year, up $190 million from the previous depressed year. On the basis of these projected fiscal developments, the GFS deficit in 2017-18 is targeted at $323 million, or 3.5% of GDP. While that is a marked improvement from the estimated $500 million deficit recorded this year, it is still higher than the $210 million deficit posted in 2015-16. With an ongoing deficit of the magnitude projected for the upcoming year, the level of government direct charge is forecasted to reach $6.8 billion at the end of 2017-18, or a new all-time high of 72.7% of GDP. The fiscal projections for the 2 years beyond 2017-18 that are set out in the budget documents are essentially straightforward extrapolations on the basis of current trends and the assumption of a so-called status quo policy stance. In essence, this represents a base case scenario that will inform our government as to the appropriate and fiscally prudent choices and phasing of its policy interventions for stronger growth and job creation going forward. It will also guide us as to the fiscal actions that will be needed to achieve our priority objective of eliminating the GFS deficit as soon as it is practicable and getting the burden of government debt to more sustainable levels. In the multi-year scenario, recurrent expenditure is projected lower by some $200 million in each of the 2018 and 2019-20 years to levels in the area of $2,450 million. This is largely due to significantly lower debt redemption payments each year. Capital expenditure is projected to remain around 2.3% to 2.4% of GDP in the outer years, with annual levels on the order of $230 million, essentially unchanged from 2017 and 18. For its part, recurrent revenue is assumed to remain at 23% of GDP going forward, implying levels on the order of $2.2 billion and $2.3 billion in 18-19 and 2019-20 respectively. As a result, the GFS deficit must be expected to decline steadily to levels of $228 million in 2018-19 and $106 million in 2019-20. That would represent 2.3% and 1.1% of GDP respectively. With these developments, the level of government debt will still continue to rise, reaching $7.1 billion at the end of the projection horizon. However, with smaller annual deficits that are projected, the ratio of government debt to GDP would begin to decline in 2018-19 from the peak of 72.7% in 2017-18 and would reach 70.8% of GDP in 2019 and 20. And again, I pause to say that it is our goal to get these levels much sooner, as soon as we have an opportunity to go through an in-depth analysis of these budget projections. Having said all of this, I do want to stress once again, for the sake of both honorable members and the Bahamian public, that the mandate given to us by our citizens features a clear and unequivocal commitment to fiscal discipline and prudence. While our transformational growth agenda is visionary and critical to the creation of a better future for our citizens, the very grave conditions of our nation's public finances mandates that we give the utmost priority to getting our fiscal house in order. That is critical to any success that we hope to achieve on the growth and jobs front. Ignoring the state of our finances would have deleterious consequences for the viability of our agenda and the future prospects for the Bahamian society and economy. Our government is thus committed as a first priority to working diligently in the months ahead to improve our fiscal situation and prospects that have been left to us. To that end, we will take action on several fronts over the next 3 months. Namely, we will undertake a judicious and in-depth review of government expenditure programs to determine where and how value for money can be enhanced, how effectiveness and efficiency of services can be improved, and where savings and reallocations can be secured to both finance the government's policy priorities and facilitate a more expeditious reduction and elimination of the GFS deficit. As was announced in the speech from the throne, we will strengthen the accountability and transparency of the fiscal operations of government in the Ministry of Finance. As such, we have embraced and would vigorously implement the IDB-funded public financial management project, details of which are on the government's website. Also, as part of this initiative, to bring transparency and accountability to the government's fiscal operations, we intend to table in Parliament a full list of financial subsidies provided to developers so that the Bahamian public can see not only where the VAT money has gone, but where all the tax money has gone. We will also seek to reduce these subsidies to an irreducible minimum and apply a very rigid test on the future requests for financial subsidies to ensure that more money is available to finance the operations of the government. The Bahamian people will be interested to know the level of subsidies that we grant to foreign investors in this country. It will be laid on the table so everybody will understand where we are and why we are where we are. This budget includes funding in the amount of $429 million for 25 state-owned enterprises, quasi-government corporations. This is $79 million more than last year, primarily because of the introduction of national health insurance. As this is clearly unsustainable, this administration will develop concrete action plans to transform these enterprises either into viable, efficient, and self-sufficient entities, or transfer them to the private sector and use any gains from these transactions to retire debt. In a further effort to enhance accountability and transparency in government, we are implementing rules and procedures through the Consistency Capital Grant Act to govern the use by members of Parliament of their annual $100,000 constituency capital grant allocations. We will introduce fiscal responsibility legislation that would make it difficult for future administrations to incur deficits unabated. This law would also prevent ministries and departments from introducing new spending initiatives in year without identifying the requisite financing from within their budget allocations. We will introduce public procurement regulations to support the amendments to the Financial Administration Audit Act. These amendments will make it mandatory for the government to use transparent bidding procedures when it acquires goods or services from the private sector. It will also mandate a certain percentage of government procurement being available for small and medium-sized enterprises. We will support small businesses. We will also introduce legislation to strengthen the Office of the Auditor General and provide it with the resources necessary to effectively and properly discharge its responsibilities as mandated by the Constitution, without any undue influence or interference from the government.
You need to repeat that.
Need to repeat that?
Yeah, repeat that.
Yeah.
Okay. We will also introduce legislation to strengthen the Office of the Auditor General and provide it with the resources necessary to effectively and properly discharge its responsibilities as mandated by the Constitution without any undue interference or influence from the government. We will also introduce revenue administration legislation, which, if approved, would formally create the Department of Inland Revenue and strengthen the government's enforcement powers on revenue collections. Individuals and businesses should be alert that in this new era of accountability and transparency, this government will adopt a zero-tolerance approach to those who do not pay their fair share of taxes. We will be fair and transparent in our enforcement efforts, but we will also be decisive. As we move into the coming fiscal year, we are committed to implement the in-year fiscal adjustments that are necessary to achieve our deficit and debt reduction objectives. A core target will be to secure a lower deficit in 2017-18 than is currently projected, as well as a lower trajectory for the deficit going forward. To that end, we will strive to eliminate the primary deficit of $31 million that is currently projected for the coming fiscal year, and to the extent feasible, achieve a primary surplus. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I want to reiterate that our government and the nation are off to a fresh start after 5 years of mismanagement and poor governance by the previous administration. We promise a change of direction, enhanced transparency and accountability, and good governance. We are firmly committed to the implementation of a progressive, transformational agenda for strengthened economic growth and job creation. As I have explained, however, we come to office from a starting position of very difficult fiscal challenges and a historically high burden of government debt. In this budget communication, I've set out our government's economic and fiscal plan for the coming fiscal year and beyond, fully taking into account the fiscal constraints that we face. I've made it clear that as prudent fiscal managers, we will pursue our agenda of change in a proactive and responsible manner, while at the same time according due priority to the need to eliminate the government's deficit and return the burden of government debt to more sustainable levels. The balancing of the many challenges and priorities before us may seem daunting. But as we have demonstrated in the past, we clearly measure up to the task. Indeed, we have a solid track record of success in reinvigorating growth and jobs while restoring order to public finances. We are steadfastly committed to doing so again, and we pray for the guidance of Almighty God as we move ahead to build a better future for all. It is the people's time. Thank you.
Ordered that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Any further communications? If none, we proceed to the laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. Okay. The Fami Island Development Encouragement Extension of Time Order 2017. The Customs Management Amendment Regulation 2016. The City of Nassau Revitalization Extension of Time Order 2017.
Order that the documents be brought up.
You want to know these now?
No, not yet. We've done the budget bill, right?
But still,
Yeah. Let me ask one question. We can do it.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the draft estimates of revenue and expenditure 2017-2018.
Order that the document be brought up. It's signed. Order that the document do lie on the table.
One at a time.
For the tabling of documents,
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the City of Nassau Revitalization Extension of Time Order 2017.
order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. For the laying of document,
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Family Island Development Encouragement Extension of Time Order 2017.
order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. For the laying of documents,
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Customs Management Amendment Regulations 2017.
order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Are there any further laying of documents? There being no further laying of documents, we move now to communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence. Leave to resign seat. And new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of reports of the committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. The chair recognizes the member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for the Act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue accounts for the financial year commencing 1st July 2017 and ending 30 June 2018.
Order that the bill be brought up. Is there a second, though, to the bill? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards deferring or defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on the revenue account for the financial year commencing the 1st of June 2017 and ending the 30th of June 2018. As many as are in favor, remain seated. Contrary will stand. The bill will be read the first time.
A bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st of July 2017 and ending 30th of June 2018.
Further first reading of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act for the appropriation of the sums of $229,725,200 for and towards defraying the expenditure of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital development for the financial year 30th June 2018.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read first time. A bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $229,725,200 for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for the capital development of the financial year ending the 30th of June 2018. As many as are in favor, remain seated. Contrary will rise. Order that the bill be read the first time.
A bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $229,725,200 for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of Bahamas for capital development for the financial year ending 30th of June 2018.
Further laying of bills. Further reading of bills. For the first reading of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Tariff Act.
Second.
Is a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Tariff Act. As many as are in favor, remain seated. Contrary will rise. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Tariff Act.
For the first reading of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Excise Act on certain imported goods.
Is there a seconder?
Stand.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Excise Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Contrary will rise. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Excise Act.
For the first reading of bills.
Same thing. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to provide for an amnesty period for the payment of surcharge. As many as are in favor will remain seated, contrary will rise. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to provide for an amnesty period for the payment of surcharge.
Any further reading of bills? For the first reading of bills?
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to provide for an amnesty period for the payment of surcharge. Sorry. Okay, then a bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act. Sorry, my apologies.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
We found the bill.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act. Order that the bill be read. Sorry. As many as are in favor will remain seated, contrary will rise. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act.
For the first reading of bills?
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Business License Act to provide for the imposition of interest on late payment of tax, streamlining of payment of tax for groups of registered under the Value-Added Tax Act and other efficiencies.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
How many bills are there?
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Business License Act to provide for the imposition of interest on late payment of tax, streamlining of payment of tax for groups registered under the Value-Added Tax and other matters related thereto. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Business License Act to provide for the imposition of interest on late payment of tax, streamlining of payment of tax, and groups registered under the Value-Added Tax Act and other matters related thereto.
Further, first reading of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to provide for the allocation of constituency capital grants for each constituency throughout the Bahamas to facilitate its development and for connected purposes.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to provide for the allocation of constituency capital grant for each constituency throughout the Bahamas to facilitate its development and for connected purposes. As many as are in favor will remain seated, contrary will rise. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the allocation of constituency capital grants for each constituency throughout the Bahamas to facilitate its development and for connected purposes.
For the first reading of bills,
That's it? No more bills, right? No more.
no, okay. Second reading and committal of bills. Committee of the whole House. Third reading and passage of bills.
No.
Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions.
Mr. Speaker,
The chair recognizes the member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, we have, prior to the sitting of the House, the leader of government business and leader of opposition business consulted and agreed for us to proceed with a resolution to borrow sums to cover the remaining expenditure for 2016-17 without prior notice.
Out of an abundance of caution, leader of the opposition.
That is correct, Mr. Speaker, and it was also agreed that we would defer debate until the substantive budget debate. But I have to comment that during the budget communication, a number of assertions were made which might have colored what we're doing here. And so, and can I just say at the outset, the opposition agrees, and we accept that the government must do as they say they must do. But we had agreed that there would be no debate on the matter, and I just wanted, because there's a lot of politics that's been injected into the communication, that I just want to point out a couple of things, and I know we're going to debate it, but I think it's only fair that I do so, lest there be some misapprehension as to what we're doing. And I think at page 41 of the minister's communication, he points out a few things, and he says that while there was a forecast of a GFS deficit of 100 million, the actual outturn is now expected to be in the order of 500 million. And then he says it's an astonishing 5 times. But he does go on to say, Mr. Speaker, the sharp deterioration in the state of the public finances did admittedly flow, to some extent, from the multifaceted impacts of Hurricane Matthew in early October 2016. On the one hand, the hurricane severely dampened economic activity in October, with the impact extended and through to the 4th quarter of the year. So he's indicating there was 0 rate of growth as a result of that. Further, on that page, it indicates that there was a shortfall in revenue as a result of this hurricane to the tune of $216 million. Hurricane, which is a natural disaster, Mr. Speaker. And it goes further to say that it also impacted expenditure in terms of having to repair public infrastructure and rebuilding efforts. And it's inbuilt into a figure of $55 million. So I just want to put the perspective as to what we're doing, lest we, because I heard the word use of deals, that language used, which is very prejudicial if you don't have a debate. And so we've agreed not to a debate, and I'm not debating. I'm just responding. I'm just clarifying what the minister said, Mr. Speaker. And so in the circumstances, we look forward to the vigorous debate. I can't wait, Mr. Speaker, but in the meantime, we do not object because we understand that there was a natural disaster and it had a severe impact on our country. And then there were probably other contributing factors which have been pointed out. But in the circumstances, we agreed to the resolution being on a nod, so to speak, without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Angliston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad that the member for Angliston agreed not to debate, because she has her story and we have ours. But I'm going to leave it for now, Mr. Speaker, and honor the spirit of what we agreed in terms of not being a debate. I'm doing the one for the 400 million to cover the overhang.
Right, that's the only one we're doing, right?
No, and I'm giving notice for the other one. Yeah. Okay. This is to cover the current deficit spending. Yes. 400 million. Yes. You already borrowed 100 million. I only borrowed the other 400. No, we're not talking about 150 because that was something else. That was for theoretically for a specific purpose, and I use theoretically very advisedly. No, you'll see at the end where it talks about 2016-17. Paragraph 3. Well, okay. Mr. Speaker.
Yes. Continue.
I wish to move the following resolution. Whereas Article 129(1) of the Constitution requires the Minister of Finance, before the end of each financial year, to cause to be prepared annual estimates of revenue and expenditure for public services during the succeeding financial year, which shall be laid before the House of Assembly, in which estimates have been laid before the House of Assembly. And whereas it is necessary to undertake additional borrowing to finance the deficiency of revenue over expenditure in the 2016-17 estimates of revenue and expenditure, which have been laid before the House of Assembly, and whereas Section 4 of the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Chapter 362, prescribes the conditions under which the Minister of Finance may raise any sum of money or part thereof by the creation and issue of registered stock, and whereas from time to time the House of Assembly has approved borrowing by way of loan agreements with banks to finance approved expenditures, and whereas Section 3 of the Development Loan Act, Chapter 382, prescribes the conditions under which the Minister of Finance may borrow monies externally or internally in currency of the United States of America, effected and secured by the issue and sale of bonds, and whereas by Section 18 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act 2010, number 26 of 2010, it is provided that no loan shall be raised by the government and no guarantees involving a financial liability shall be binding upon the government unless entered into with the prior approval signified by resolution of the House of Assembly thereof. And now, therefore, be it resolved that this House, 1, authorizes the Minister of Finance to raise by way of loan or loans the sum of $400 million in such currency as the Minister may determine. 2, authorizes the Minister to raise such amounts by way of A, creation and issue of registered stock under Section 4 of the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Chapter 362. B, loan agreements with banks, including commercial banks, on such terms as are mutually agreed, and C, the issue and sale of bonds under Section 3 of the Development Loan Act, Chapter 382, provided that the aggregate increase in sums owed by the government from amounts borrowed under paragraphs A to C does not exceed the sum of $400 million, provided the House receives communication from the Minister of Finance at the earliest opportunity after the apportionment among paragraphs A, B, and C, and approves the proceeds of the said loans being used for the purposes of defraying expenditure in the 2016-17 estimates of revenue and expenditure in excess of revenue.
I move that the following resolution be agreed. Whereas Article 129, subsection 1 of the Constitution requires the Minister of Finance, before the end of each financial year, to cause to be prepared annual estimates of revenue and expenditure for public services during the succeeding financial year, which shall be laid before the House of Assembly, and which estimates have been laid before the House of Assembly. And whereas it is necessary to undertake additional borrowing to finance the deficiency of revenue over expenditure in the 2016-2017 estimates of revenue and expenditure, which have been laid before the House of Assembly, and whereas Section 4 of the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Chapter 362, prescribes the conditions under which the Minister of Finance may raise any sums of money or part thereof by the creation and issue of registered stock, and whereas from time to time the House of Assembly has approved borrowing by way of loan agreements with banks to finance approved expenditure, and whereas Section 3 of the Development Loans Act, Chapter 382, prescribes the conditions under which the Minister of Finance may borrow monies externally or internally in currency of the United States of America, effected and secured by the issue and sale of bonds, and whereas by Section 18 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act 2010, number 26 of 2010, it is provided that no loan shall be raised by the government and no guarantees involving a financial liability shall be binding upon the government unless entered into with the prior approval signified by resolution of the House of Assembly. Therefore, be it resolved that this House, 1, authorizes the Minister of Finance to raise by way of loan or loans the sum of $400 million in such currency as the Minister may determine. 2, authorize the Minister to raise such amounts by way of A, creation and issue of registered stock under Section 4 of the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Chapter 362, B, loan agreements by banks, including commercial banks, on such terms as are mutually agreed, and C, the issue and sale of bonds under Section 3 of the Development Loans Act, Chapter 382, provided that the aggregate increase in sums owed by the government from amounts borrowed under paragraphs A to C does not exceed the sum of $400 million, provided that the House receives communication from the Minister of Finance at the earliest opportunity after apportionment among paragraphs A, B, and C, and 3, approves the proceeds of the said loans being used for the purposes of defraying expenditure in 2016-2017 estimates of revenue and expenditure in excess of revenue. I move that the following, as many as are in favor, will remain seated.
Those opposed.
Those who oppose will rise. The resolution is agreed. Further resolutions? No further resolutions? Member statements? Appointment of select committees? Instruction to select committees? Discharge of select committees? Notices for further meetings? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, at the next sitting of the House, I or another member representing the government will move for the second reading and committal, third reading and passing of the bills read a first time today. Mr. Speaker, I also give notice that I or another member representing the government will move for the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Article 129(1) of the Constitution requires the Minister of Finance before the end of each financial year to cause to be prepared annual estimates of revenue and expenditure for public services during the succeeding financial year, which may be laid before the House of Assembly, and which estimates have been laid before the House of Assembly. And whereas it is necessary to undertake additional borrowings to finance the deficiencies of revenues over expenditure in the 2017-2018 estimates of revenue and expenditure which have been laid before the House of Assembly. And whereas Section 4 of the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Chapter 362, prescribes the conditions under which the Minister of Finance may raise any sum of money or part thereof by the creation and issuing of registered stocks. And whereas from time to time the House of Assembly has approved borrowings by way of loan agreements with banks to finance approved expenditure, and whereas Section 3 of the Development Loans Act, Chapter 382, prescribes the conditions under which the Minister of Finance may borrow monies externally or internally in the currency of the United States of America, effective and secured by the issue and sale of bonds, and whereas by Section 18 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act, 2010, number 26 of 2010, it is provided that no loan shall be raised by the government and no guarantees involving a financial liability shall be binding on the government unless entered into with the prior approval signified by resolution of the House of Assembly thereof. Now therefore be it resolved that this House, 1, authorizes the Minister of Finance to raise by way of loan or loans the sum of $322,462,707 in such currency as the Minister may determine. 2, authorizes the Minister to raise such sums by way of A, creation and issue of registered stock under Section 4 of the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Chapter 362. B, loan agreements with banks, including commercial banks, on such terms as are mutually agreed. And C, the issue and sale of bonds under Section 3 of the Development Loans Act, Chapter 382. Provided that the aggregate increase in sums owed by the government from amounts borrowed under paragraph A to C does not exceed the sum of $322,462,707 after offsetting such amounts as may be necessary to amortize or finance existing debt, and the House receives communication from the Minister of Finance at the earliest opportunity after the apportionment among paragraph A, B, and C, and approves the proceedings of the said loans being used for the purpose of the defraying expenditure in the 2017-2018 estimates of revenue and expenditure in excess of revenue.
Order that the notice be brought up. Yeah. Order that the notice do lie on the table. Any further notices?
We're missing a bill. We need to request. Yeah.
There being no further notices? One more. The chair recognizes the member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, we'd like to give notice that we're going to send a bill. The Customs Management bill. We'll send it to the clerk so that it can be on the agenda
Thank you.
and circulated to members.
And on that, so we'll know when to expect sight of the bill, because you have to review it.
We will do that by this afternoon.
Thank you.
Any further notices? Adjournment?
We have a vested interest in your future.
The chair recognizes the member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, resolved that the House at its rising do adjourn to the 7th, Wednesday, the 7th of June, 2017, at 10 a.m.
Is there a second? Yes. It has been moved and seconded that the House at its rising do adjourn to Wednesday, that's the 7th of June, at 10 a.m. The chair recognizes as many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Adjournment.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
It has been moved and seconded that the House do now adjourn. As many as are in favor will stand. The House do stand adjourned.
Well, Deputy